The sirens had long faded by the time Officer Mark Danner stumbled out of the woods, his uniform soaked with blood that wasn't his. In his arms, he carried his K-9 Shadow, chest rising faintly, a dark stain spreading across his fur. Somewhere behind them, the child's sobs still echoed against the trees, carried by the wind that smelled of gunpowder and rain. Grayfield wasn't the kind of town that forgot things easily. But what happened after that night, inside the sterile halls of St. Mercy Hospital, would leave even the hardest hearts trembling. If you want to keep reading, like and stay with us, the first gunshot cracked through the night like a split in the world itself. Officer Mark Danner ducked instinctively, mud splattering his boots as he pulled his K-9 Shadow behind a fallen log. The forest around them was alive with movement, rain slashing through the canopy, flashlight beams cutting through fog, radios hissing with broken commands. Unit 7 to dispatch, suspect armed, heading east along Hollow Creek. Mark's breath came hard. He pressed the mic, voice low. Copy that. We've got eyes. He's heading toward the bridge, shadows tracking. The German shepherd strained against a leash, growling deep in his chest. His blackened tan coat shimmered under rain, nostrils flaring with each breath. Somewhere ahead, a child's cry echoed faintly, a thin, desperate sound that didn't belong in a night like this. Mark's heart clenched. That was the boy. He remembered the call less than an hour ago, a kidnapping from a small gas station off Highway 19. The suspect, Jared Hensley, was armed and unstable. The child, Eli, 6 years old, had been taken from the back seat while his mother ran inside to pay. It was supposed to be a routine shift. Then everything changed. Now, knee-deep in mud and fear, Mark pushed forward. The beam of his flashlight swept through twisted roots and puddles until it caught something pale. A shoe, small, soaked through. Then, ahead, movement. Shadow, Mark whispered. Go. The dog shot forward, low and silent. Mark followed, gun drawn, every sense sharpened. The forest smelled of iron and pine. His pulse beat in his ears, loud as thunder. A flicker of motion, someone darting between the trees. Police, he shouted. Dropped a weapon. A muzzle flash answered. The shot echoed like a hammer inside his skull. Bark exploded beside him. He hit the ground, rolling, returning fire toward the flash. Shadow barked once, a fierce, deep sound that froze the air and lunged ahead. Shadow, stay! Too late. The shepherd was already sprinting into the darkness. Another gunshot split the air, and then came a sound that Mark would never forget for the rest of his life. Shadow's sharp yelp cut short, followed by silence. Mark ran. He found the clearing just as the rain began to thin. The suspect was down, gun kicked away, clutching a bleeding shoulder. The boy sat nearby, shivering, face streaked with tears and dirt. And Shadow was on the ground, his side slick with blood, chest heaving shallowly. God, no. Mark dropped to his knees. His hands trembled as he pressed down on the wound, feeling the warmth of blood seep through his fingers. Stay with me, buddy. Stay with me. Shadow's eyes fluttered open. He gave a faint whine and tried to lift his head toward the child. That broke something inside Mark. It's okay, he whispered, voice cracking. You did good. You saved him. The boy crawled closer, still crying softly. He pushed me away. The bad man, he was gonna... Mark nodded, swallowing hard. I know. You're safe now. The radio on his shoulder hissed. Unit 7, status check. Do you copy? Mark couldn't speak. He looked at Shadow's paw, limp in his hand, and the blood pooling beneath him. Finally, he forced his voice out. Hoarse. Officer Danner, suspect down. Child safe. K-9 Shadow. His voice broke. Requires immediate medical assistance. Critical. The medevac came too slow. By the time they reached the road, the ambulance lights painted the trees in blue and red. Mark sat in the back. Shadow's head in his lap. The boy asleep against a medic's shoulder. The shepherd's breathing was shallow. Each inhale a battle. Mark looked down at him and whispered, You're not leaving me. Not after tonight. Shadow blinked, eyes glassy but alive. He had been with Mark for 7 years, trained together, bled together, trusted each other more than anyone else in that department. Shadow was more than a partner. He was family. The medic's voice broke the silence. We're taking him straight to St. Mercy. Closest vet hospital's got an emergency wing that handles K-9 units. Mark nodded numbly, watching the trees blur past a window. When they reached the hospital, the lobby was chaos. Officers from half the county lined the hallways, soaked and silent. Someone tried to take Mark's arm to lead him aside, but he refused to let go of Shadow's stretcher. "I'm staying," he said flatly. "He doesn't go in there alone." The vet team hesitated, then nodded. "All right, officer, but you'll need to stay clear once we start." They wheeled Shadow into a sterile white room. Machines beeped softly. The air smelled of antiseptic and rain-soaked fur. Mark stood against the wall, dripping, hands shaking. He watched as they worked. Clipped fur, cleaned the wound, inserted tubes. One of the nurses murmured quietly about the bullet's path, the chance of survival. The vet, Dr. Ellis, looked grim. "It's close to the lung. If it's ricocheted, we're in trouble." Mark didn't move. He just stared at Shadow's chest rising and falling beneath the mask. When the surgery doors finally closed, he sank into a chair in the hallway, face buried in his hands. The adrenaline was gone now. Only exhaustion and fear remained. Across from him, Sheriff Louise Grady approached, mid-50s, calm, deliberate, and with eyes that never quite gave away what she was thinking. "You did good tonight, Mark," she said softly. "You saved that boy." "Shadow saved that boy," he replied without looking up. She paused. "He's one of the best. They'll do everything they can." Mark didn't answer. After a moment, the sheriff added quietly, "You should know, the suspect didn't make it. Bled out before they got him into custody." Mark's head lifted slowly. "Hensley's dead." "Yeah." She hesitated. "But there's something else. The weapon he used, it was police issue." That pulled him upright. "What?" Louise nodded. "Serial scratch, but it matches our department model. Ballistics will confirm. Until then, I need to know. Was there anyone else on that scene? Any backup you didn't call in?" Mark frowned. "No, just me and Shadow." She studied him for a long moment, then said quietly, "Then we might have a problem." Hours passed. Rain streaked the hospital windows, turning the outside world into a smear of gray. Mark hadn't moved from his chair. The hallway was almost empty now. Just him, the hum of machines, and the faint smell of coffee from a night desk. When Dr. Ellis finally emerged, Mark stood so fast his chair tipped over. The vet's face was tired, mask pulled down around his neck. "He's stable," Ellis said. "Barely. Bullet missed the lung by a few millimeters. We removed it. He's going to need rest, antibiotics, and time." Mark exhaled shakily, gripping the wall for balance. He's going to make it?" Ellis nodded. "He's a fighter." Mark wiped at his face with the back of his sleeve. "Can I see him?" "Just for a minute." Inside the dim recovery room, Shadow lay beneath warm blankets, hooked to monitors. His chest rose and fell in steady rhythm. Mark knelt beside him, resting a hand on his paw. "You did it, boy," he whispered. "You did good." For a moment, the dog stirred, opening his eyes just enough to meet Mark's. Then he drifted back into sleep. Mark sat there for a long time, silent. Outside, somewhere down the hall, he could hear a child's laugh. The boy, awake and safe. But beneath that sound, faint and wrong, came another noise, an argument. Two officers talking near the waiting area. "Told me Danner went alone. But Grady says she saw another unit pull off near the creek." "Another unit? Who?" "Don't know. Didn't log on dispatch." Mark froze. His blood ran cold. Another unit. He stepped out quietly, heart pounding. The hallway was dim, the officers unaware of him listening. One of them lowered his voice. "Heard the car match one of ours, unmarked. Whoever it was, they left before backup arrived." Mark's stomach turned. Sheriff Grady's words echoed back to him. The weapon was police issue. He looked back at the recovery room window, at Shadow lying still beneath the glow of monitors. The rain outside had turned to mist, wrapping the world in silence. Whatever had happened tonight, It wasn't over, not even close. By morning, Grayfield had turned into a whispering town. Every diner booth, gas pump, and corner porch carried the same hushed question. What really happened in the woods last night? Mark Danner sat in his truck across from St. Mercy Hospital, staring at his reflection in the windshield. His eyes were bloodshot, jaw unshaven. The sun was up, but everything still felt gray, the kind of gray that doesn't lift even when the light does. He had barely slept. The hospital's veterinary wing wouldn't let him stay overnight, but he hadn't gone home either. Every hour, he called in for updates on Shadow. Stable, they kept saying. Resting. But stable wasn't enough. Not when pieces didn't fit. He replayed it again and again. The suspect's gun, the second car, the moment before the first shot. Someone else had been there. Someone who didn't want to be seen. Mark rubbed his temples. He needed answers, and he knew where to start. The sheriff's office sat on the edge of town, an old brick building with paint peeling around the windows. When Mark stepped inside, the hum of morning chatter cut short. Everyone turned to look. The returning officer, the one who walked out of the woods carrying a bleeding dog and a crying child. He nodded stiffly, heading straight for the evidence room. Sheriff Grady met him halfway. "Morning, Danner," she said, her voice low but steady. "You should still be at the hospital." "I will be," he said, "after I see the report." Her jaw tightened. "Which report?" "The one you're keeping quiet. About the second car." Her silence told him everything. Mark folded his arms. "Two deputies were talking last night. Said an unmarked unit was seen near Hollow Creek. I checked dispatch logs this morning. No record of it." Louise exhaled slowly, rubbing the bridge of her nose. "That's classified until we know more." "Classified?" Mark's voice sharpened. "Someone out there had a police weapon and tried to kill a child. You really want to play games." "Watch your tone," she said quietly. He leaned forward. "Whose car was it?" Louise studied him for a long moment, then finally said, "We traced partial tire prints. The pattern matches one of our older Crown Vics, same model used by retired deputies. But the plates were removed." Mark frowned. "Could have been stolen." "Could have been," she said. "Or it could have been someone who knew how to avoid our radar." Her words hung heavy in the air. He caught the flicker in her expression, hesitation, guilt, maybe both. "You know something," he said. Louise sighed. "A week ago, a sidearm went missing from evidence lockup. Internal matter. I didn't want to make it public until I knew where it went." Mark's stomach turned. "And you didn't tell me?" "It was being handled." "By who?" She hesitated. "Sergeant Kellen." Mark froze. "Kellen?" Grady nodded slowly. "He volunteered to track the serials. Told me he had a lead." Mark's pulse kicked up. Sergeant Joel Kellen wasn't just a colleague. He'd been Mark's partner for 6 years before Shadow came along. The man had saved his life once. But lately, Kellen had been off. Late to calls, drinking on duty, short temper. Mark stepped back, trying to steady his voice. "You think Kellen was in that car?" "I didn't say that," Grady said. "But if he was, we need proof, not hunches." By the time Mark left the station, the morning had turned to drizzle again. The air smelled of wet asphalt and burnt coffee. He drove out of town, the wipers squealing against a windshield, heading toward Kellen's place on the edge of Lake Briar. The man's house was quiet, windows dark. The yard was cluttered with old tools, a rusted lawnmower, a tarp covering something large. Mark parked down the road, walking up the gravel driveway. His boots crunched softly. He knocked once. No answer. "Kellen, it's Danner." After a pause, footsteps sounded. The door opened an inch, chain locked. Kellen's voice came through, hoarse. "Hell, Mark, you look like you've been through a meat grinder." "I could say the same for you." "Yeah, well, long night." Mark met his eyes through the gap, bloodshot, wary. "You heard about Hensley?" "Whole damn county did." "You also hear the gun he used was police issue?" That got a reaction. A flicker of tension before Kellen masked it with a shrug. "Yeah, Grady told me. Said she's running prints." Mark leaned closer. You wouldn't happen to know how a department sidearm ended up in a kidnapper's hand, would you? Jesus, Mark, Kellen said, laughing without humor. You think I sold him a gun? I think you've been acting strange for weeks. And I think you were near Hollow Creek last night. The door shut a little, chain rattling. You don't know what you're talking about. Then prove me wrong. Show me your car. Get off my property, Danner. Mark took a step back, heart pounding. The quiet between them stretched like a live wire. If you're in trouble, tell me. Don't make me find out the hard way. Kellen didn't answer. The door closed. Mark stood there for a moment, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. Then he turned toward the driveway. The tarp by the shed shifted slightly in the wind. Something metallic glinted beneath. He moved closer, lifted the edge. Underneath sat a mudcake, unmarked Crown Vic front bumper dented. Right tire pattern with a tread he'd seen before. Hollow Creek. His blood went cold. Mark drove straight back to town. He didn't tell Grady yet, not until he knew why. Instead, he went to hospital. Shadow was awake this time, had lifted weakly as Mark entered the recovery room. His tail thumped faintly. "Hey, buddy," Mark whispered, kneeling beside him. "Looks like you're too tough to quit." Shadow blinked, a low rumble in his chest that almost sounded like a sigh. Mark rested his hand on his fur, the warmth grounding him. "I think I found the man who set us up, but I need proof, and I can't trust anyone else." The dog's eyes followed him, steady, loyal. Mark took out his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he stopped on one name. Dr. Claire Moreno. She'd been the department's medical examiner before she left for a private practice. Smart, blunt, and one of the few people who still returned his calls. When she answered, her voice was wary. "Mark, it's been a while. I need a favor. Quiet one. Go on. I need ballistic confirmation. Fast. The bullet pulled from Shadow. Can you match it against something for me?" "Department won't like that. I'm not asking them." She hesitated. "Bring it tonight." That evening, Grayfield felt even smaller. The streets were empty, streetlights flickering through the mist. Mark parked behind the old town clinic, where Claire worked nights. She met him at the back door, lab coat over a hoodie, cigarette tucked behind one ear. "You look like hell." "Feels about right." He handed her a small evidence bag. "The bullet. This came from Shadow. I need to know who fired it." She raised a brow. "That's an official investigation." "Not anymore," he said quietly. "This one's personal." She studied him, then nodded. "Give me an hour." Mark paced the corridor while she worked. The hum of fluorescent lights buzzed like nerves under skin. Finally, Claire returned, holding the bag with a printed report clipped to it. "You were right," she said. "The bullet's from a Glock 17, police standard issue. Serial trace. Same series as a gun reported missing from your evidence lockup." Mark's chest tightened. "And the ballistic match?" She hesitated. "It matches another shooting, one that never went to trial. Remember the warehouse case 3 months ago? The one where the suspect resisted, and Kellen filed it under self-defense." He stared at her, silent. "It's the same weapon," she said. "Exactly the same." Mark felt the room tilt slightly. "So Kellen kept the gun." Claire nodded grimly. "And someone used it again." When he stepped outside, the rain had turned into a fine mist, the kind that clings to skin like cold breath. Mark sat in his truck, gripping the wheel until his knuckles went white. Kellen, his old partner, the man who'd once pulled him out of a burning car, now stood on the other side of a line. Neither of them could cross back from. He dialed his number again. No answer. He texted, "We need to talk." Now. No reply. Then buzz. A single message appeared. "You don't understand. Don't come here." Mark's stomach twisted. He started the engine. Kellen's house was dark again, but this time the front door stood open. The wind pushed it gently back and forth, creaking. Mark stepped inside, flashlight sweeping across the room. The air smelled of whiskey and gun oil. "Kellen," he called. Silence. Then a soft sound. Footsteps from the kitchen. He moved quietly, gun drawn, pulse hammering. Rounding the corner, he froze. Kellen sat at the table, gun on the surface, half-empty bottle beside him. His hands trembled. "You shouldn't have come," he said, voice flat. "You shot my dog," Mark said quietly. Kellen shook his head. "Not me. You think I'd ever?" "No, but I gave Hensley that gun. I didn't know what he'd do." Mark's voice broke. "You sold him a department weapon?" Kellen's eyes were bloodshot, full of something close to shame. He was supposed to turn evidence. "I thought he'd help us take down Grady. I didn't know he'd take the kid." "Grady?" He nodded weakly. "She's dirty, Mark. Been for years. Hensley had proof, records, payoffs, the works. He wanted protection. I thought if I armed him, he'd come in alive. But when it went bad..." Mark's hand shook on his gun. "You let a criminal carry a badge weapon to expose the sheriff?" "I made a mistake," Kellen whispered. "A big one." He looked up, tears in his eyes. "But you don't get it. The bullet that hit Shadow wasn't his. It came from behind you." Mark's stomach dropped. "What?" "Check your vest. There's a hole. Small, right shoulder." Mark glanced down and froze. There was a tiny tear he hadn't noticed before. A grazing line. He hadn't realized it then, through the rain and adrenaline. A second shooter. Behind him. And if Kellen was telling the truth, then Sheriff Grady wasn't the one protecting him. She was hunting him. By dawn, Grayfield was drowning in silence. The kind that doesn't come from peace, but from fear holding its breath. Mark sat in his truck by the lake, engine off, window cracked just enough to let in the fog. The air was damp, heavy with the smell of pine and gasoline. His hand still trembled where it gripped the wheel. Kellen's confession replayed in his head like a fever dream. The bullet came from behind you, behind him. That meant someone else had fired into the clearing that night. Someone trained. Someone who knew exactly where he'd be. And if it wasn't Kellen, then only one other person had the power and the cover to pull it off. Sheriff Louise Grady. He turned the key in the ignition and drove. The sun was barely rising when he reached St. Mercy Hospital again. Inside, the fluorescent lights burned cold. Shadow's recovery room was quiet, the steady rhythm of machines the only sound. When Mark stepped closer, the dog's eyes opened faintly. He lifted his head, weak but alert, tail giving one slow thump. "Good morning, partner," Mark whispered. He crouched beside him, voice low. "We're not done yet. You got me through that night. Now I need you to hold on a little longer." Shadow's paw twitched against his arm, as if he understood. Mark stood, pressing a hand to glass before leaving. He had a meeting to end, and a promise to keep. The sheriff's office was empty when he arrived. Grady's door was closed, blinds drawn. Only her light was on. Mark knocked once. "Come in." Her voice was calm, too calm. He stepped inside, the room smelling faintly of old coffee and gun oil. Grady sat behind her desk, uniform immaculate, a stack of reports before her. "You look tired," she said, almost kindly. "You should take a few days. Clear your head." He didn't sit. "You were in those woods." Her expression didn't change. "I was at the command post." "You're lying." She leaned back, folding her hands. "That's a dangerous accusation, Officer Danner. You had motive. Hensley had something on you, files, evidence. Kellen told me everything." Grady's jaw tightened. Kellen's a drunk with a conscience that leaks at the seams. He's been desperate to cover his own tracks for months. "You expect me to believe this?" "I don't expect anything," she said softly. "But if you're smart, you'll stop digging before you end up buried." Mark stared at her. "You shot at me, Louise. You hit Shadow instead." For the first time, her composure cracked, just slightly. A muscle in her cheek twitched. Then she smiled. "Prove it." He dropped a small envelope on her desk. Inside, the ballistics report from Dr. Claire Moreno. Grady glanced at it, frown deepening as she read. "The bullet matches the missing sidearm," Mark said quietly. "The one checked out under Kellen's name. But the powder residue on Shadow's wound shows a different burn pattern. That bullet came from a Sig Sauer. Department issue, your weapon." Grady's eyes flicked up cold. You're reaching, she said. Then show me your gun. Silence. Her hand twitched toward her holster. Mark's own gun came up instantly. Don't. For a moment, neither of them moved. The air between them felt like a wire stretched to snapping. Then Grady's voice dropped to a whisper. You don't understand what you're doing. I understand enough, he said. You were on Hensley's payroll. He blackmailed you. When it went bad, you tried to clean the scene. Her lip curled faintly. You think you know what it's like to run this place? The council cutting funds every year. Officers leaving, debts piling up. I kept this town together. Sometimes you have to bend the badge to save it. You cross a line. Her voice hardened. There's no line in Grayfield anymore, Mark. There's just survival. She stood slowly, moving from behind the desk. You really think anyone will believe you? You're exhausted. You're traumatized. Your partner's in surgery. Kellen's a wreck. It's your word against mine. Mark didn't blink. Then let's make it official. He backed toward the door, gun steady, and with his free hand, pressed the button on his body cam. The faint red light blinked alive on his vest. Grady froze. Mark said quietly, You're under arrest for obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, and attempted murder. She laughed once, low and sharp. You don't have the guts. Maybe not, he said, but Shadow does. Her face twisted. Rage, fear, maybe even regret. Then her hand snapped toward her weapon. The room exploded in motion. A single shot. The sound tore through the office, echoing down the hall. Mark staggered back, his gun clattering to the floor. The smell of gunpowder filled the air. For a heartbeat, he thought he'd been hit again. But when he looked up, Grady was the one leaning against the file cabinet, a crimson bloom spreading across her shoulder. He exhaled shakily, lowering his shaking hands. You should have stopped when you had the chance. She slumped to the floor, gun slipping from her grip. You think this fixes anything? She hissed. You think they'll thank you? They'll turn on you next. Mark holstered his gun, breathing hard. Maybe, but at least the truth will outlive the both of us. He called it in. By the time backup arrived, Grady was conscious but silent, cuffed and bleeding. And for the first time in years, Grayfield felt like it might finally wake up. 2 days later, the town gathered outside St. Mercy Hospital. Reporters lined the curb, cameras flashing. But inside, in a quiet recovery room far from the noise, it was just Mark and Shadow. The K-9 was sitting up now, chest bandaged, eyes bright again. Someone had left flowers by the bed, from the mother of the child he'd saved. Mark sat beside him, coffee in hand, voice low. They're calling you a hero, you know. The dog who took a bullet for a kid. They're talking about a medal. Shadow tilted his head, tail brushing softly against the blanket. Mark smiled faintly. Not that you care about medals. He rubbed behind his ear, the spot that always made him grunt with contentment. You just did what you always do, he whispered. You protected someone who couldn't protect themselves. The door creaked open. Claire Moreno stepped in, lab coat over jeans. You look better, she said. Feels like it. They're saying you'll be reinstated once the investigation clears. You planning to stay? He looked down at Shadow. The dog's eyes met his, loyal, steady, unspoken. I don't know, he admitted. Maybe it's time to stop chasing ghosts. Claire smiled softly. Then maybe start chasing peace instead. She left him with that thought. As dusk fell, Mark walked outside with Shadow at his side. The sky burned orange over the hills, clouds rolling like slow waves. Down the street, the townspeople were lighting candles for the boy, for the night that could have gone so much worse, and maybe, just maybe, for forgiveness. The mother stood among them, the little boy clinging to her hand. When he saw Shadow, his face lit up. He ran forward, wrapping his arms around the dog's neck. Shadow leaned into the hug, eyes soft, tail wagging gently. The mother met Mark's gaze. Thank you, for both of you. Mark shook his head. He did the saving. She smiled through tears. Then thank him for saving my whole world. Mark crouched beside Shadow, his hand resting on the dog's collar. The candles flickered in the wind, small lights against the dark. You hear that, partner? He whispered. whole world. Shadow looked up at him, and in that look, in that quiet, wordless loyalty, was everything that needed to be said. The town had wept, justice had bled, but somewhere between the two, something pure had survived. And for the first time in years, Officer Mark Danner let himself breathe.